Good morning. Let me try that again. Good morning, everybody. For those of you who weren't here on Monday, my name is Paul Kautza. I'm the Director of Education for TDWI. I'm the guy that's responsible for all the classes and all the instructors you guys are in all week. So I'm hoping that, that you're getting a lot out of the week. How many people have been here since Sunday? All right, we got 2 more days. Got to power through. But for those of you who weren't here on Monday, there's still some networking opportunities, still some time to get to know each other here because, as I said Monday, there's a good chance that somebody in this room either has the same problem or have solved the same problem you're trying to solve. So get to know each other, use this time as networking as well, and get the last out of the last 2 days, and I hope the week was good for you. So with that, I've got just one housekeeping announcement. Tomorrow, classes will start promptly at 8 o'clock. Breakfast and everything will be upstairs at 7:30. There'll be a shorter lunch. It'll be an hour lunch. So we'll get you out of here at 3:30 to catch flights and stuff. So it's a little bit more condensed schedule, but you still get the same amount of class time, just a little bit shorter lunch. We start at 8, all right? So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce this morning's keynoter, Laura Everson. Laura is the business analyst in the Department of Planning Services at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Co-located with the Data Warehouse BI project team, her role as the business project architect is to ensure that the warehouse solves the clinic's business problems, drive requirements and sprint planning, review designs, and ensure proper quality assurance. She is a member of the International Institute of Business Analysts and is passionate about data warehousing and using agile techniques to achieve success. So with that, I give you Laura.
Good morning, everyone. Morning. Great to be here with you today at this great conference. I do want to quick thank everybody who put together this conference. It's been a great week. And I want to thank Paul and Lauren and the rest of the staff, everybody who made this opportunity possible. Thank you very much. This morning, I'm going to be discussing Agile best practices and what we've learned at Mayo Clinic in the data warehousing unit that I'm working with, and how to apply those best practices in a technique that will work. Just so that I have a level set, who in the audience has heard of Agile? Awesome, good. Who is actually using Agile? Great. Okay, that's wonderful, because this presentation actually is not an Agile 101. Because so many of you are familiar with it, I will jump more to actually what we've been doing. I will say to level set that we are working in 2-week sprints. So those of you who are not familiar with Agile, we do we're doing 2-week work cycle called a sprint, where we do pre-planning and planning, then we do the development work, and at the end we do a demo and a retrospective for our customers. I'm going to intersperse customer with product owner throughout the presentation, just so that you're aware of that. So as we've been going through at Mayo Clinic, working with this again, I'm with the warehousing unit. And as I was thinking about Agile, I tend to think football players. So in my mind, they are Agile. I hope my Minnesota Vikings get a little bit more Agile this year, because we lost on Sunday. That was not good. Now, when I was talking to somebody about Agile who does not know data warehousing, she said, I don't understand what you're getting because I don't understand data warehousing. Can you explain this to me in a way that I will understand? She said, I like to bake. So I said, well, if I were baking in an Agile mode, I would get all the requirements from you about what kind of cookies you like. And then I would go and I would gather the ingredients, and I would mix up the dough. But rather than bake the cookies right away, I'm going to let you taste the dough. So that if I have put the wrong kind of chocolate chip cookies in the dough, I have an opportunity early to redo that dough. And then I'm going to bake a test cookie. If you like that cookie, if it's crisp enough or soft enough, then I'm going to bake a whole pan of cookies. And once I bake the pan and you approve of that, then I'm going to bake you a batch of cookies. And now we have Agile delivery of cookie baking using iterative delivery, building in quality into our process. Sorry, getting used to the clicker. So with Agile, success comes from implementing these key practices. I've listed them on the screen. I would say Agile is not easy to adopt. We have Wise Management at Mayo Clinic who hired an Agile coach for us so that we could have a practical application with the data and with our processes to work through. You do need to discover what works for your team. So if you've seen process flowcharts, some people like to use Post-its for that process. Others prefer to use some sort of an electronic system, perhaps a spreadsheet. Whatever works for your team is completely acceptable. With Agile, your roles within your team may vary from your Agile role may vary from your role at your organization. And that's okay, but you need to have a discussion to realize and work through those roles because you want to have somebody accountable within your organization for each of the Agile roles. For example, my role is a business analyst from Mayo Clinic's perspective. However, in an Agile role, I'm a co-project architect. So I represent the business side driving this project from beginning to end, from the very first requirements until this product is in production. However, I also have a co-project architect who is on the technical side, an IT colleague. We have found that that works for us in this role and fulfills the requirement. So think about your roles, think about system tester, who's going to fill what role. We all know what would happen with this crewing analogy if somebody either wasn't pulling their weight on the rowing or if somebody was pulling too hard. You're going to go in a circle. It's not going to be an effective teamwork. Agile takes commitment. It is an investment. It's an investment by the team members to try something new and challenging and different, and it's a challenge for perhaps management to allocate resources to learn these techniques when it can take 50 to 30% of your time for example, a product owner, and 100% of the time for the development staff. It's also a different way for sponsors and stakeholders to think. If they're used to getting a project plan with very specific steps detailed of what will be done, the 2-week or 3-week or 1 week, whatever you're using for your sprint, that type of work schedule is very different for them to get used to. So it does take some patience, it takes commitment. However, I would say that the best way to win over people who are resistant to this technique is to actually prove that it works. And I'm going to show you some examples at the end of some types of graphs and charts that you can show your sponsors of why it's working. This slide is purely my opinion. When we had the project manager came to me and said, Laura, I think we should co-locate the product owner with you. And I thought, okay, the development team's together, but are we pushing a little bit to have the product owner who's in another building actually come join us? Actually, he was absolutely right. This has been highly effective to have the product owner co-located with the development team for half his day so that I know exactly when I can get a hold of him. I no longer have to schedule meetings on his calendar. And one example of how effective this is we had a data issue resolved going back to the source system within 18 hours. Because he was so committed to the project that he quickly changed his schedule and came and joined us and worked through an issue. And instead of taking a week to go back and forth in email chains, we had this issue resolved in 18 real-time hours. Agile does take, again, investment. The time required of a product owner can vary from 30 to 50% depending on where you are in the process. And that can be a bit of a challenge for people to swallow for resource managers. But again, the investment is worth it. That product owner should be a source system expert or have access to people who are, so that you have a single point person who can get your questions answered for the development team. This slide is simply a graphical of what we feel the time saved by avoiding the email chain that's on the bottom to having direct contact by being co-located, by being able to drop into someone's cube and discuss an issue rather than have to go through an email chain. This is an example of a little bit generalized requirement of an epic and theme. We are using epic themes and user stories as requirements gathering tools at Mayo Clinic to do the development work. This is a little bit wordy. I don't expect you to memorize it. But I did want to share an example so that you can see how this flows through. So we've been working with supply chain data on the project. We have multiple project teams working on this. With the epic and the theme, I did want to just mention quick before I go to user stories that if you think of the epic at a director level and the theme at an operations manager level, it might be helpful for writing those. They really represent the business problem that we're trying to solve. And the ones I have in the presentation are written in that formal style as a vice chair. I need to solve so that I can, in that formal style. So be thinking about them, again, at that director and then the operations manager level. User stories operate at a little different level. If you think of it as an epic theme user story hierarchy for requirements, the user stories are the data checks that answer the problem statement from the theme. When I thought of these as a data level, it clicked with me, and it became much easier to write user stories. And I have an example. Again, this is from real work at Mayo Clinic. These are examples of user stories. Now, I've included the short form in the presentation because the long form is too long for the screen. But I use the short form in various ways, and I'll show you some of the ways we've used it. Keep in mind, user stories can span sprints. And we did a process called value pointing with our stories. That became crucial to our process. So value pointing drives the business because it's a valuable exercise that the product owner will do where they're telling you what of those user stories are most important to them. And it became just a great exercise. It really drove the development for us. And I have some examples. With value points, we're using the Fibonacci scale. How many people know what the Fibonacci numbers are? Okay, I saw a few hands down. So they're 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55. We stopped at 55. But essentially, 1 is the lowest, 55 is the highest. And it's a scale, somewhat of a weighted scale, so that the customer can tell you what is most important to them. Now we have those same stories with user stories with value points added. Developer stories, I would call a branch off of user stories. So if you think again of that epic theme user story hierarchy, I would say that developers kind of branch off the user stories. This is the work that is actually going to get done during the sprint. So in our case, when we're looking at developer stories, we have to pick ones that are going to be done in 2 weeks. If the work is too large for 2 weeks, we split it out. For example, we're working on a data warehousing project with a third normal form environment as well as a data mart. And then we have our BI deliverable as reports. We've got a very traditional customer in this case. So with the developer stories, we've sometimes had to break down the coding into an initial and an incremental coding, for example. And that's okay. We just had to get to the point where we could agree on what we can get done in 2 weeks. Developer stories make up a backlog. The backlog of developer stories will drive your work, and the goal is to have 80% of your backlog established when you're in sprint 0, before you go into sprint 1. The first time I did a backlog, it was challenging, but I didn't do it alone. The key is a team effort. Sit down with a development team, with your data architects, with your systems analyst, everybody who might be involved in the project, and get their opinion of what work are we going to need to get done in order to deliver this product into production. So brainstorm. Now the beauty of the backlog is if you're doing similar types of projects, the first time I did this, it took me days. And I say me because I took the menu from the team and I went and actually did the backlog. However, the backlog that I did working with a new team before I came to this conference took me about 2 hours because I already had that backlog serving as a menu for the types of work we did. And now I've got this and I can keep using it as a template going forward, and the other teams are using it as well. I included a basic example of a backlog. These are developer stories again. They will be story pointed at a planning conference, our planning work session. This backlog that I included is a bit of a simplified version. The one that expanded on this was, I think, about 400 rows long, about 400. So I modified it just to be a simple version so that you could see the types of work. Notice that there is migrations included. There's development work both for the third normal form environment as well as the data mart. We have automation. So make sure you include, that's why the team effort is important, because you want to try to capture all those things that happen with code that can kind of hide in the background, but maybe our IT colleagues know about. Notice the 2 at the bottom. They are rework, and that can happen, and that's okay. Your backlog needs to be flexible. You need to be agile with your backlog. You will invalidate work that you thought needed to be done that didn't need to be done, and you'll end up adding some work. So again, with the backlog, shoot for having 80% of your backlog complete based on what you know at sprint 0. Pipeline work is work that's done either before or after that sprint of development. For the sake of this presentation, I had to break these out to a different slide. However, the backlogs that I keep and that the other analysts keep on our team, we've incorporated the pipeline work. So for example, before a developer can do the work, we have the analysis or the data mapping done. We consider that pipeline work. It's not done by a developer. I would say the same is true with any SIT testing, solutions integration testing at the end. That would be pipeline on the back end. The reason why I keep it in is because if we're thinking about estimating projects, this work still all matters. Data models have to be done. Testing has to be done before moving to production. So I would suggest keeping it in the same backlog. Again, it's in the presentation separately just for this presentation. And one of the beauties of the backlog, it also can eventually make up your current estimate sheet. Once you have an idea of what your backlog looks like and what story points are, and your velocity being how many story points can the development team complete within a 2-week sprint, you start to be able to estimate how long this project is actually going to take to deliver. This is one of the things that builds credibility. I use this to double check against the Microsoft project plan that we were having to keep. Because again, our sponsors are used to working on that. Pre-planning. This is a key step. Remember I mentioned that before you hand off to the developer, analysis and data mapping should be complete? The pre-planning session is the time to meet with your team. I would leave the developers out of this meeting, but it would be all of the analysts and the testers and the developers, or excuse me, not the developers, the rest of the team, to have this meeting and discuss what are we ready to hand off to the developers. Do we have the mapping done? Do we have the analysis done? Do we know that they are ready to leave the planning meeting ready to code? I will say that value pointing has also been a great benefit for this exercise because I bring a data model and I sit down with the technical project architect and the other analysts on the team. And we look at the data model and say, what is most important to our customer? What do they want done first? So we go back to the user stories. We go back to the value pointing. And it drives what we're going to start working on first. At the planning session, this is when we're actually picking work that we're going to do. And we use that pre-planning session also to do a rank of the work. So again, when we think about user stories and value pointing, we're driving what work we're going to do first. And then we would get to the planning session, we've got an idea of what we need to do. Now, sometimes the conversations with the developer can alter that, and that's okay. But during this planning session, we're actually assigning, so to speak, the work to the developer and making sure that the team is on the same page. We're estimating story points for the developer stories. And we're saying what we're going to get, we're agreeing as a team what we're going to get done in the next 2 weeks. With planning, I have found that using an estimating poker system is highly effective. One of our creative team members decided to put vehicles on cards, and we have everything from a compact all the way up to a, semi-truck. During that process, where I found it valuable is before we were using that and everybody around the table had a chance to voice their opinion, what was happening is everybody was just agreeing with the project architects, whether it was me or the technical project architect. And that wasn't what we wanted. We wanted a healthy, respectful discussion. Once we had people do a 1, 2, 3, hold your number up, now we had good debate. Because if somebody had a 13 and somebody had a 5, why? What did the developers see about that work, perhaps, that the architect didn't, or vice versa? And it's led to very good, respectful debate. At the demonstration, have your project architect set the scene. Remind the team of why we're doing what we're doing. I usually bring up the user stories. I often bring up the epic and the theme. And I talk about what user stories we're going to be discussing. It's important for the development team to understand why they're doing what they're doing. So eventually, ideally, you can have the product owner drive the demonstration. Now, that person may need some training first, or they might need access to the data or to the report or whatever BI solution you're giving them. So that may not happen at first, but once you can have them do it, it's fantastic, because now you have the product owner telling the team, this is what you're building for me, and this is why it matters, and this is what I can do with it. And it's a really neat moment when that happens. I'd also, on that same line, encourage you to invite sponsors or stakeholders to your demonstrations. Don't underestimate even a manager's interest in seeing the technical work being done. I think there's value in that. I knew that we had a very successful team going with one of the teams I worked with when my product owner's manager said, I wish I could come every 2 weeks because I'm so excited about what you guys are doing. This is just amazing. And he didn't know how to read data models, but he saw the whole big picture of what we were doing, and he was very excited about it. This is also your chance for your product owner and your stakeholders to help you change course. If they do not like what they're seeing, this is an opportunity for them to redirect you. I mentioned velocity earlier. This is a velocity chart that I put together, and I wanted to highlight a couple things on it. The top line is the total story points that a team that I worked with was doing. The middle one is our ETL development, and the bottom one is our BI development. For our team, we were eventually able to establish that middle line and get a pretty consistent velocity. We had one dip there, but for the most part, we were able to establish a very consistent velocity. We hit that velocity in the second sprint that we did, I think it's sprint 9. We started doing value pointing. And then sprint 10, we did pre-planning. And it absolutely launched our development. And we hit a velocity and for the most part really stuck to it because we had everything ready to hand off to the developers. We knew what we were doing. We had a goal. We had a clear vision of what we were doing. And the bottom one on there, I'm going to mention when we get to iterative delivery. We were actually able to start our report work, our BI work, about 14 weeks earlier than we would have in past history because of a technique that we're using based on being agile, thinking flexible and innovative. A retrospective, I would say it's the time to get real. This is the time to have a discussion with your team about what's working and what's not, without finger pointing. So we developed a Net Promoter Score survey based on the processes involved. And I can't show you the whole survey, but these are actual results. One of the types of questions involved is, during the sprint, I was sufficiently free from other work to complete my stories. That matters because if that person was getting reallocated to other work, that's a problem for our team. And we need to discuss why, what happened, how to avoid it, or if it was unavoidable. Now, those of us who want 100% on any survey, these results were a little hard to adjust to. However, Anything over 50% in this type of survey indicates a highly successful team because it's based on marketing techniques where negative feedback is weighed more highly. Anybody able to identify with this guy? Thinking about, I'm in a data warehousing environment. How do I provide iterative value? Does my product owner really want to see 3NF data out of a warehouse? I have found yes. We have found that that is true, and I'll show you an example coming up. A key component of Agile is delivering value to the customer earlier. One of the main ways I would say Agile does that is by building customer confidence, because every 2 weeks, they're going to get to see what you're doing. And they're involved, the product owner is involved daily in this work. Tremendously builds customer confidence. When I think of the cookie analogy again, I would say testing the third normal form data or data mart data, just raw data that you have either replicated or it's in development, that's your cookie dough. And let them taste the cookie dough. We found an actual quality issue by letting a customer doing that. I dumped out SQL out of tables from a 3NF environment and let them review it. They actually found a quality issue just by looking at that they did not realize their source system had. They were extremely grateful. Because that happened, then we've also turned that into giving them error reports. We had a great systems analyst who developed an error report based on the business rules that they were pointing out as we went through testing this data. So don't be afraid to pull integrated data with a SQL statement early, put a semantic layer on early if you can, get the customer involved very early so that they can be starting to be reassured of the quality of what you're building. This is an example of a value build-up chart. So when I mentioned going out to your sponsors, to your stakeholders, our project manager worked with our technical project architect and put a value on each of the database tables that we had. And then our project manager put this slide together, and it represents the build-up of how our development was going. And again, this is just the warehousing piece. This is not the actual BI piece. But it gave our sponsors confidence that we are working through this, that there is good work being done, and it gave us an idea of how we were coming along with the date that we had originally been assigned. You can see that the red is the dev environment, and that is how we were developing tables and going through. And the blue chunk in there, when I mentioned the user acceptance testing of our third normal form data, that's what that chunk is. We had a couple sessions with him, and it turned out to be very beneficial. I mentioned quality increased. That is definitely a key to Agile. We had, on the one team I worked on, we had 3 design changes as we were going through it. So 7 out of my 91 ETL stories in that case were code fixes. However, those code fixes were caught in development. Because we had a very involved product owner, we were showing him integrated data early, we recognized that those requirements were not right very early in the process. And we all know that moving code and catching something in production is exponentially more expensive to fix. So that was one of the values, is catching those errors early so that, again, they had a high level of confidence that what we're delivering is going to meet what they're looking for and be a quality product as well. Now, I have heard various discussion and at points whether development time is decreased using Agile. I have examples where it is. No, the one misperception I think that people make, though, is you still have to do the same work. but you're working differently. So it's the working differently, it's the product owner being involved, it's catching potential fixes and requirements earlier that speeds up this process. It's the planning, it's the analysis, it's the discussion and the team involvement where your speed comes from. It's not that you're doing less work, but it's the process that will make a difference. Agile drives innovation. I will say that is my scribbling on that example. If I had known I was going to be presenting it, I probably should have tried to write a little neater. But what I wanted to point out about this is when I mentioned we had BI development going on 14 weeks earlier, I took the user stories and I blew them up and cut them out and put them on a board because we were trying to figure out what our BI structure should look like. What did our customers really need? So I cut out the user stories and I put them on a board. You can see that there's value points attached to each of those stories. For photography reasons, this is just a very small sample. My board was probably 3 by 4, and the number 2 represents number 2 of 9 buckets, so to speak, of this, showing a process flow. But where this is beneficial is previous to this, I would have written a report spec. Under a waterfall methodology, I would have written a report spec and I would have handed it off to the BI developer. And he or she would have gone out and done the best that they could based on this report spec and come back to me. Where Agile drove innovation is that we met as a team. The product owner, the BI developer, and I met as a team, worked through what our structure of our BI deliverables was going to look like. And then our developer left that meeting with a very good idea of what she needed to code. And the product owner, again, had quality assurance because he was able to actually move these stickies around on the board. So he got to tell us what his structure should look like. It was a highly valuable exercise that I would definitely do again, and other teams have started doing as well at Mayo. And then it turned into a very nice process flow that you can see in a more formal version on the right. Here's my example of where Agile does reduce time to production. These are 2 projects that I've been involved with. The lower one represents a waterfall project I did a few years ago. And from requirements gathering to code and production, it was 15 months. On a project I've been working on now, one of the recent ones, we had a 9-month span, 40% decrease in time. However, on that same project, we were also still delivering another data mart and BI deliverables for another team. And we also got asked to help with some ETL coding for another team. So had we not been involved with that, I think we would have been more in the 6-month range. We would have seen more of a 50 to 60% reduction. But these are the statistics that are true from when the code went in, or from the requirements gathered to the code going into production. So it can be faster. But again, what makes it faster is applying the techniques correctly and working as a team, getting that planning and analysis time done so that there's not rework, having the product owner involved so that you catch accurate requirements and can adjust as necessary. For documentation, everybody's favorite topic, right? Yeah, no. I will say it's a myth that Agile does not require documentation. It is true that it requires the right documentation. I was very happy not to have to do 10 versions of a report specification and could do that exercise with the report mock-ups instead. That's an effective change to reduce documentation. You're still going to have to document your requirements. Production support still needs information about what they're going to be maintaining. I would highly recommend that you track your requirements in some sort of a change log so that you have a record of the decisions made. So do the right documentation. So in conclusion, be agile with Agile. I've had an opportunity to talk to some of you through the week. And I just encourage you to say that if you're in a 2-week sprint and it's not working for you, either adjust your developer stories or talk to your management and say, we need a 3-week sprint because the work that we're doing requires an extra week. And that's okay. Be agile, be flexible. That's the whole concept. Use these ideas as a construct, but figure out what works for your team. Be innovative. Come up with new ways to think, to work through issues and barriers. The graphs and charts that I've included as examples, yes, they do cost some extra work at first until you get used to doing them. But the benefits of being able to prove to your stakeholders and managers that these are working, and the benefits of having an excited team. One of the teams I worked with recently, before planning sessions, they decided they wanted to start going to breakfast together before we were together for an 8-hour day. I thought that was a fantastic example of team cohesion and a sense of accomplishment and value that this team had because they were accomplishing every 2 weeks. They could see that they were accomplishing. We all want to like to go to work. And this can be a very valuable way to have that happen because you get a sense of accomplishment and it makes your day much more comfortable. The final thing I want to say is as you are learning these techniques, share them with people. Talk to each other. Find out what's working and diffuse that information throughout your organization and with the people that you meet. As I said, I've had a wonderful chance to talk to some of you this week. I've very much enjoyed meeting everyone that I've had a discussion with. And it's been a wonderful learning opportunity this week. So I wish you well with your Agile application. Remember to be flexible, and good luck with it.
Thank you, Laura. So get the most out of the last 2 days, 2 more days of classes. Everything will start upstairs in 15 minutes. And remember, classes tomorrow start right at 8. Shorter lunch, get you out of here at 3:30. Thank you all for coming.